everyone, today we're going to do an ASMR and learn, but we're going to do something different. So we're not going to do a medical related, not directly, topic, because I'm also doing my MBA in healthcare administration, so I have to read this chapter so I can write a paper on it. And since I gotta read, and y'all like to listen to me talk, I figured I'd just do both, so you guys can learn with me. This is for my operations management course, and it says it's an introduction to processes. It has to do with like flow units and stuff like that, key process metrics. So we're gonna do this together. We live our lives from one process to another. There is a process for getting a driver's license, a process for completing a college degree, a process for talking to a doctor, and on and on. In those cases and in many others, we take the perspective of a customer. We participate in the process to receive a good or service, but there is another perspective, the view of a process observer, not the view of somebody in the process or receiving the process, but rather the view of somebody watching or managing the process. That is the view we take in this chapter and throughout this book. There are two key questions a manager of a process should ask. One, is the process performing well? Two, how can we make the process better? In some sense, the operations manager is very much like the coach on a sports team. The coach must first decide how to measure the performance of the players. For example, a basketball coach might want to track the number of shots attempted, the number of assists, and the number of points scored per game. Next, the coach needs to figure out how to make each player better, especially how to make the team better. The first step, measure the process, is critical for the second, improve the process. If you do not know how to measure a process, then it's difficult to know how to improve or even to know if you have improved it. Process definition, scope, and flow units. A process is a set of activities that takes a collection of inputs, performs some work or activities with those inputs, and then yields a set of outputs. For example, interventional radiology at Presbyterian Hospital in Philadelphia accepts patients' inputs, performs minimally invasive advanced imaging techniques like real-time X-ray, ultrasound, computer tomography, and magnetic resonance imaging, and then sends patients home. Output, hopefully with better health or at least with the information needed to improve their care. This can seem like a very complex process. There are many people involved, such as patients, receptionists, nurses, physicians, and lab technicians. There are numerous pieces of complicated equipment, and there are multiple rooms, including a waiting area and procedure rooms. Despite the complexity of an interventional radiology unit, if we step back a bit, the complexity can be boiled down to a simple picture, which is shown. Figure 2.1 is called a process flow diagram because it provides a graphical representation of the process. It has several components. The inputs to the process are indicated with arrows flowing into the process, and the outputs are indicated with arrows flowing out of the process. Boxes within the process flow diagram represent resources. A resource is a group of people and or equipment that transforms inputs into outputs. In Figure 2.1, there is a single resource, the radiology unit, but as we later see, process flow diagrams can have multiple resources with the output of some resources used as the inputs to other resources. So at a basic level, the interventional radiology unit takes in patients as inputs. The unit then performs some tasks on them when they are in the unit, and then treated patients leave as the outputs. This describes the radiology unit's process scope, the set of activities included in the process. We have defined the scope of this process to include the entire interventional radiology unit. This is appropriate if we are responsible for the entire unit and we want to keep track of how the entire unit is doing. But other scopes are certainly reasonable, depending on your perspective. For example, if you are a technician who assists with real-time X-rays, you might only be interested in the portion of the unit that performs real-time X-rays. In that case, your process flow diagram might look like Figure 2.2. We have retained the same inputs and outputs, but our scope has narrowed to just a single type of procedure. If our scope can narrow, it can also expand. For instance, say you are the CEO of Presbyterian Hospital, then your process could be described with the high-level picture displayed in Figure 2.3. In addition to the process scope, to begin to understand and analyze the process, we must define a flow unit. The flow unit is the basic unit that moves through a process. It is generally associated with the outputs of a process. In the case of the interventional radiology unit, a natural flow unit is a patient because the purpose of the interventional radiology unit is to provide care to patients. Figure 2.4 illustrates 3 other processes and possible flow units. In each case, it is not hard to imagine that the flow unit could be something different than what is listed. For example, the flow unit in a blood donation center could be a blood donor, but pints of AB blood is better if your interest is specifically on the output of AB blood. The processing plant could use a gallon of milk as a flow unit, but generally it makes more sense to define the flow unit in terms of output rather than input. And while entertained people certainly flow through a theater, the theater may more directly be concerned with the output of revenue in terms of dollars. To summarize, there are several important rules with respect to defining the flow unit. Choose a flow unit that corresponds to what you want to track and measure with respect to the process. Stick with the flow unit you defined. Don't measure some aspects of the dairy process using a gallon milk as the flow unit and then switch to pounds of milk powder. It makes no sense to combine things in different units. Choose a flow unit that can be used to measure and describe all the activities within the process. To use an exercise example, distance traveled might not be the best measure of all activities for a triathlete who must swim, bike, and run, because people generally bike much further than they could swim. A more unifying flow unit could be minutes of workout, or to be even more sophisticated, calories burned, or some other measure of power. In business, a currency, such as euro, dollar, or yen, is a common flow unit that can be used to span all of the things and activities in a process. Once you have defined the scope of the process and its flow unit, you are ready to start analyzing and measuring some key performance variables for the process. Brief intermission. If you were wondering what those sounds were, it is in fact Padme. Anyways, 3 key process metrics: inventory, flow rate, and flow time. A process metric is something we can measure that informs us about the performance and capability of a process. For a process observer or designer, there are 3 key process metrics. A process metric, a scale or measure of process performance and capability. Inventory is a number of flow units within a process. For example, dollars in process, kilograms in process, or people in process. Flow rate is the rate at which flow units travel through a process, as a rate is measured in flow units per unit of time. For example, dollars per week, kilograms per hour, or people per month. The key feature of a rate is that it is always expressed in terms of some unit, boxes or dollars, per unit of time. If the per unit of time is missing, then it is just inventory. Flow time is the time a flow unit spends in a process, from start to finish. Typical units for this measure are minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years. Inventory tells us how much stuff is in the process. This is useful to know because inventory generally takes up space and may cost money. For example, if the average inventory of people in the radiology unit increases, then the radiology unit might eventually need a bigger building, which comes with a cost. If a retailer needs to increase the number of items in the store, then it might need a bigger store, which means higher rent, and it needs to have more cash to buy the inventory. Flow rate tells us how much stuff moves through the process per unit of time. More units flowing through a process is generally desirable because the point of the process is to produce output. Flow time tells us how much time stuff spends in the process. If you are a patient in the radiology unit, then you surely care about your flow time. The manager of the radiology unit is therefore interested in flow time because it influences the satisfaction of its patients. To see how these process metrics can be evaluated for the interventional radiology unit, we can collect data on when patients arrive in a part or process, like those reported in Table 2.1. Okay, so that was just a little bit of reading for my MBA. Let me know what you thought. If you like it, if you don't like it, do you want more like that? I can put more in. I also have a bunch of essays that are like part of my MBA program that I can read if y'all are interested in that. Let me know. It doesn't have to all be medical because I am in 3 different schools right now. I got this. But I hope you enjoyed. Good night.